Okay, well, welcome back to another episode on our podcast into the, what do we call it, into the Sheriff's Spotlight. I think it's those words are all part of the title. I'll eventually get this down. It's been a couple of years now of doing the podcast. You think I would have the name down. But I think this is going to be one that a lot of people have been waiting for. We're going to discuss in depth the investigation into the Rachel Morin homicide case. And we're joined along with my normal co-star here.
Co-star, I like it.
Colonel Davis. You want to say hi?
Hello, everybody.
By several members, and I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves and what their role is, but several members from our Criminal Investigations Division, all of whom, and as did the entire division, so many partners, had such a role in this case, in this manhunt. So with that, I'll go to Captain Lane, and then we'll go on around, and everybody can introduce themselves.
My name is Andrew Lane. I'm the captain with the Harford County Sheriff's Office Criminal Investigations Division.
My name is Chris Maddox. I'm the sergeant in charge of the major case unit.
I'm Philip Golden with the Harford County Sheriff's Office Criminal Investigations Division. I was the lead investigator for the case.
I'm Megan Waltzmeyer, Digital Forensic Examiner at the Sheriff's Office. I'm one of two examiners on this case.
And again, this is a case that captured not just our local community's attention, but across the country and across the globe. We last spoke about it in February of 24. We're going to do a bit of a review to catch up those who maybe aren't as familiar with it, but at that time we were basically 6 months into the investigation in February 24 when we did our first podcast on this case, and it was right around the area at the time. I think we just released a sketch in the investigation, and we had a tie back. Well, we had an early tie back on some DNA evidence, but I'm going to leave it to, I don't know whoever wants to volunteer, kind of a little bit of an overview to give us a bit of an overview, sadly, of Rachel's homicide, how this whole thing started, and then where we went from there.
We started the investigation when we received a missing persons report. So a Harford County Sheriff's Office patrol deputy responded out to a home in Bel Air where they took a report of a missing woman who they identified as Miss Morin. What we were told initially is that she went for a run on a local trail called the Manhunt Trail, that she had left around 6 p.m. and that she never returned. The individual who made the report was her boyfriend, who didn't reside with her, but he told us that he had gone to that area in an attempt to locate her. When he got there to the trailhead on William Street, he saw Miss Morin's car parked in the parking lot late in the evening, well past when she would have been running. This is when he became concerned that something had happened, and he returned to Miss Morin's home where her children were and contacted the sheriff's office to make a report. That really started the investigation off, and it started a large-scale search that began that evening and stretched well into the next day when, unfortunately, sadly, Miss Morin was located inside a large drainage tunnel, is what I refer to it, that goes underneath the Bel Air bypass. Miss Morin was located in that tunnel, essentially nude, and had clearly been seriously assaulted and deceased.
And one of the one of the challenging things, I guess, was that, ironically, we were actually looking for two missing people that morning, and I'm trying to remember, I don't remember all the details, but it was another female that went missing, and the community had concerns that maybe these two cases were related. I'm happy to say the other one eventually turned up. It wasn't that same day, but it was several days later, fine. Her absence was of her own doing, and she turned back up. But Captain Lane talked about Rachel a little bit, a mom of five children, various ages, unmarried, and her boyfriend was the one who reported missing at the time. So I know we had a lot of volunteers, people stepping up to help on both of those searches that were going on simultaneously. And then, unfortunately, when Rachel's body was discovered, I guess that launched off the next aspects of the investigation.
Yeah, Sheriff, I think just as not really as an update, because I don't think we've really talked about it in public to this point. I don't know who would be the best person, maybe Sergeant Maddox or Phil, to go over kind of the crime scene there. It was obviously evident to us that what we were dealing with at that point in time was a homicide. and we really haven't talked about the crime scene. Can you talk a little bit about what we found when Rachel's body was found?
Yes, sir. So Miss Morin was in the drainage tunnel, like Captain Lane said. She was laying in approximately 1 inch to 2 inches of water. There was her clothing was removed from her body. A shoe was discarded close by the trail, and then we had to get the area cordoned off so people wouldn't walk up on our crime scene and disturb the evidence. So we were required to get with Bel Air Police and other members of Harford County Sheriff's Office to close down the trail at that point, because up until that point, Rachel was missing. We were hoping the public would stumble upon something to help us find her. So locking down the crime scene and preserving the evidence, making sure we recovered everything and the blood trail and everything. So,
correct me if just so it was actually we had put out asking for assistance, and it was actually 2 citizens that were on the trail out there looking as well, who actually, I don't want to say, I guess, stumbled across the crime scene.
Yes, sir. So where she was located, it wasn't the initial point of where she was attacked, but they did check the drainage tunnel to see if she was inside there. But then we had to backtrack and find the initial point where she was attacked. And then we had to luckily process the scene in a somewhat timely manner, because that evening we had some serious rain that came through the area. So we wanted to process it as soon as possible, but take enough effort to make sure we collected everything.
And for those listeners who maybe aren't local or aren't familiar, most of our Harford County residents are very familiar with the Ma and Pa Trail, but it's one of the converted old railroad systems that's been converted for hiking and biking. It's actually a Parks and Rec maintained operation through county government. And it actually stretches, I think they're connecting it now, but it's going to stretch a total of like 8 miles through. Much of it's wooded, secluded area, and where Rachel, very safe. I've mentioned many times since Rachel's case started, my backyard actually hits a portion of it to the northern end of the county, away from the town, and Rachel's body was just discovered out of the town limits, just a short distance. But again, it's an area that goes through mostly wooded areas and is very secluded. So a lot of people are thinking a community trail or something, how does this happen, or how does she not be discovered? It's miles long and in the deep woods. And
the drainage tunnel, coming from about 30 yards off the trail in a pretty wooded, dense area. The sheriff said it was wooded, but the time of year it was, you couldn't see the drainage tunnels from the trail unless you knew they were there and you were looking for them, basically, right?
No, that's true. You wouldn't be able to see the drainage tunnels, and the trail has a bend right there, and from the distance of where we know Rachel was attacked to the beginning of the tunnels is about 75 feet. And once she was discovered, we went through. We actually found a disturbance in the leaves moving forward and a blood trail that led into that tunnel, which you wouldn't have seen as a passerby, but once we knew she was there and started processing the entire scene. The processing of that scene took several hours and really wound up being a crucial component to how the case was ultimately solved.
So she was assaulted on the trail and forced or dragged some way back to the tunnels.
That's right, sir. We believe from witnesses and some different things that what happened is she was walking down the trail. She was clearly attacked right almost in front of the drainage tunnel, about 75 feet away on the actual hard-packed trail, and then drugged and pulled through the woods over a small rocky rise and then into that drainage tunnel.
And just something that's so wildly out of the norm for our community. Again, we don't know where people are going to be listening to this podcast, this episode, but we know it's got worldwide attention. A small community. Bel Air is roughly 10,000, 12,000 people in a county of 260,000 people. But the Bel Air area is recognized as one of the safest places in the state, probably in the country. And for this horrific crime scene to have been discovered there, it just so far out of the norm from what it just shook our community to the core. I think what you kind of touched on, and maybe that's where Megan comes in a little bit, one of the astounding things, exceptional things came out of this processing the scene was the recovery of some of the digital evidence, the cell phone and stuff. Do we want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we could get into, it's part of the crime scene. We're talking about the crime scene of some of the electronics that were discovered as part of the evidence?
Yes, so as we processed the crime scene, we were lucky to have Megan come out and assist us, and we actually recovered a cell phone inside the drainage tunnel that where Miss Morin was located. The water maybe have only been about an inch deep, but further back in that tunnel, the water became 3 to 4 feet deep. The suspect had damaged the phone intentionally, smashed the phone, and then thrown it into the deeper water of that tunnel. So as we were processing the scene, we called Megan and asked her what we could do to try to preserve that evidence and hopefully be able to get something from that phone.
Yeah, so I was already out retrieving video that morning from a couple places, and Corporal Gaynor had called me. And he was like, hey, Megan, we found a cell phone here in the tunnel. It's damaged and it's submerged in water. Basically, what do I do? And I instructed him if he had a plastic bag to collect that phone in the plastic bag, keeping it in the water, and to seal it all in the bag together. Because the moment that phone would come out of the water and interact with the air, it's going to start corroding. So with it being in the water at that time, it was essentially preserved. And I wanted to be able to get back to the lab and actually see what I was working with before it came out of the water. That's
the advantage to having highly trained forensics people on your team who know what to do in that situation. Because I think most people would say, all right, grab it, get it out of the water, dry it off, and put it in a bag, and don't let anything happen to it. And then your advice is exactly the opposite.
A lot of people said that to me. They were like, so you couldn't have just put it in a bag of rice? Or I was like, no, it's a little different if you just drop your phone like in the sink or in a puddle. But this phone had been submerged in the water for, at this point, who knows how long, but it was hours. So the last thing I wanted to do was to have it start corroding.
Wow.
And I know from those early hours in the investigation, the effort that went into trying to ensure that we had no digital evidence, any information off of that phone from the suspect. You know, he went to great lengths to try to destroy the phone.
Oh, yeah.
And I know for myself, I felt pretty bleak hope. And to Megan's credit, that proved to be his efforts proved to be not as productive as he had assumed. It was one of the wondrous. Maybe that's too big of a word. I don't know, but it was amazing to me, not being somewhat technology challenged,
having problems timing your phone right.
Yes, exactly. To understand that evidence wasn't completely lost, and that we were able to recover so much off of that phone.
I was determined to get that phone to work, and once I got my hands on it, I mean, it was very damaged front and back. Even once I took it apart, there was sediment inside of the phone, and like the phone itself the frame was physically bent. So it was not in good shape at all. But thankfully for me, when I took it apart, most of the damage was to the battery. So the part that I really needed, honestly, looked to be in pristine condition. And I cleaned it quite a few times with 99% isopropyl alcohol. And I did a board swap with a donor phone that I actually got from our IT department. And I put that working logic board inside of the donor phone, and it powered on.
Wow.
That's science fiction stuff to me. It's way over my level of not even ability. That's beyond that, but even understanding it. But I know, I think I think many places around this country that probably doesn't happen. At least that phone is not intercepted enough by someone capable enough to make sure that information is protected and preserved and retrievable.
Yep.
So, no, cool. Kudos for that.
Thank you.
So we're still processing the scene with what information?
Yeah, I was going to say, we've established now that we have a crime scene, we have a homicide, we're collecting evidence, and we know that we're going to start looking for suspects in the homicide. So what would be the first steps that you're taking after, we've processed the scene? Where are you guys looking to go with this case at this point?
So we know there's several entrances and exits off the trail. So initially we were just trying to collect video footage. We obviously didn't know necessarily exactly when the crime occurred, but as much video footage, the different angles and the different ways on and off the trail that we could collect. We also, going back and looking at Rachel's social media, it appeared through her previous trips to the trail, which she would frequent the trail pretty much on a daily basis.
This is like a daily runner, right?
Yes, sir. She had typically worn a smartwatch as well, and she had earbuds that she would listen to music on. And talking to our good witness that we had on the trail that saw Rachel, unfortunately, right before she was attacked, we knew she had earbuds on, and she was doing something with her watch at that time. So we went back and actually canvassed a separate section of the trail, focusing on the opposite end of the trail from where the actual attack had occurred. And that's when we found the smartwatch that belonged to Rachel. And Megan was
Bring
able
Megan
to
back in?
Yeah.
Yeah, I received the watch once it was found, and it was in the same condition as the phone. It was damaged the front screen and the sensor, the wrist sensor, was both damaged. I was able to, once I got into the phone, match that it was in fact her watch based off of the serial number. It was linked in the app on her phone. I did not I wasn't able to power on the watch. I didn't mess with the watch, but the watch data had synced with her phone. So I was able to see the data from the watch in her phone when I downloaded it.
That data turned out to be really valuable that Megan located because Rachel had been missing for a number of hours. And one of the first things we're looking for when we're trying to find video and we're trying to find witnesses to be able to understand her time of death. And we had a really large window when we started, and Megan was able to shrink that window down to about a minute and a half from when the attack started.
Wow, cause based on the vitals, because, if you're familiar with smartwatches, you know that, especially if you're out exercising, you probably had an exercise app on it that's kind of like monitoring your vitals, when your heartbeat and your breathing and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, like when I had the data loaded in my software, at this point, we didn't really know what we were looking for, and I didn't really know where to start. And when I was looking at her data, you can put it in like timeline view, so you can see everything chronological as it's happening on the phone. And her health data, it shows in like an hour blocks. And so I went down to the last recorded stuff on her phone, and one of the last few hours of the health data, it's displayed as a graph, so you can see graph after graph after graph, and then suddenly I didn't have any more graphs. So then I went to the previous one, and I actually realized that hour-long graph was really only 10 minutes, and that kind of became our starting point there.
So now we got a timeline, we got a crime scene, we got electronics recovered.
Along with other evidence, because obviously DNA played a large part. So forensics investigators are collecting.
That's forensics investigators processing the scene, but one of the pivotal pieces of evidence we recovered that day was we took swabs from Rachel's body, and those swabs were taken at the scene, and then they were taken again at the time of autopsy at the medical examiner's office. We were fortunate to work with the Maryland State Police Crime Lab, and they, due to the nature of the crime and the severity, really pushed the casework through quickly for us. And within days, we were able to find out that we were looking for one individual who deposited DNA in multiple places on Miss Morin's body, and it was not multiple individuals, it was one person who left multiple DNA samples on her remains, which let us know that we had who our suspect was going to be or what their DNA profile was.
Right. And before we move on to that part of the case, just one thing, a lot of sadly, you have a unwed mom of 5, attractive, out exercising. The attention was initially focused elsewhere by a lot of the community members. And I won't say we weren't guilty of maybe looking in that direction, because you're looking at everyone. And I can remember giving many press conferences at the time that we weren't going to rule anyone out in her death until we knew who exactly did it. And so whether the perpetrator was involved, and Captain Lanes kind of spoke about how we started to narrow that down with the DNA. Rachel's boyfriend. A lot of people wanted to assumed, I guess, jumped to the assumption that he was guilty. I know we saw it on our social media that he had a hand in this or something.
Yeah, everybody kind of thought, no question about it, the boyfriend did it. That was what the word was.
Have you looked at the boyfriend? You know, we a lot of people follow these true crime things on TV or podcasts or stuff like that, but they kind of get ahead of themselves. And pleased to say, you know, that's not the way we operate, and that's not the way law enforcement. You know, you deal with the evidence, you deal with the facts, and you move forward. But again, that aspect of the investigation, I know that he was very cooperative, you know, with everything that we asked of him, and everything that he provided to us. At the end of the day, obviously, the case led elsewhere, but proved himself to be 100% uninvolved and had no role in this other than being the victim who lost his girlfriend.
So, Sheriff, I think even though he's a man of few words, but of great skill, I think we're going to force Detective Phil Golden to fill us in a little bit on how we went about, I don't know, rolling him out or trying to figure out who the suspect actually was.
So it's no secret that in the law enforcement community, whenever someone is killed, we always look at those who are closest to them, and we work our way out. We interviewed him multiple times. He was very forthcoming with information. He gave us his phone. His phone helped us initially to kind of prove that he wasn't involved, but ultimately we wanted to rule him out. We knew we had DNA. He provided his DNA, and at the end of the day, his DNA is what ultimately ruled him out as a suspect. Once that happened, it was kind of back to the drawing board, and we started looking for our next person of interest that we could hopefully rule in or rule out.
Now we're a complete whodunit again. We don't have a person that everybody's going to assume is the suspect as a suspect. Now we're going to try to figure out who else out in the world, if it comes out to be, could possibly be the suspect who committed this crime. So what are our next steps at this point?
Our next steps at this point were submitting the DNA that we had recovered that we felt comfortable was the individual who caused Rachel's death into a system called CODIS. And what CODIS does is it matches DNA from known offenders and DNA deposited by unknown offenders at crime scenes. And it runs that check nationally. And when that profile was uploaded into the CODIS system, it let us know that this crime linked to another crime in Los Angeles that occurred in March, several months prior.
Right, and this was the infamous doorbell camera video from the home in Los Angeles where, I know we discussed this on the former podcast related to Rachel's case, that we had so much that gained national attention overnight. When it was released, I know we had some conversation once we had that hit, whether we released it or not right away, because we didn't want the suspect to necessarily know we were onto him, but we also didn't want someone out there who was capable of such violence, who had done what ended up being a break-in and an assault at the house out in Los Angeles, to do it again without us trying to at least identify him. So ultimately we released the video, I think the same day that we got the link or maybe the next morning. And
I think it was the next day we got the link from Los Angeles. We had their body cam footage that showed, and the ring doorbells that we really released because that had the suspect on it. And we were hoping that somebody would be able to identify him from that link. But I'll let you guys talk about kind of how that went, because I know we got hundreds, if not thousands, of tips on who that could possibly be in that video. And
I will say, the video shows him kind of the profile coming out and then him turning in the back of him walking away. And the question I got the most when that video was released was, if we have the doorbell camera of him coming out, why don't we release the doorbell camera of him coming in? So, Phil, why didn't we do that?
That's the easiest question I can probably answer, because we didn't have it. He did not enter through the front door of the residence in L.A. He entered through a side window. The only thing we knew was the information that the witnesses in L.A. could give us, which were our suspect was a Hispanic male, roughly 20 years old, height and weight. And, of course, with the picture, we put that out there, the Ring doorbell camera footage. and we started to get a lot of tips. We appreciate the community's assistance with that. However, pretty much every tip we got was a dead end, unfortunately. But we don't know that until we rule them out. And during the course of the investigation, we probably got, on the low end, 1,000 tips from all the different things we put out there, from the doorbell footage to the sketch, to just people sending in tips. I think I saw something on the trail around that time.
Well, before moving on to the sketch, which came a couple months later when we finally felt comfortable enough to release it, back on the DNA, the second most question I got when that happened was, if you have his DNA, you have his name. How come that's not the way it is?
I wish that was the case. Unfortunately for us, I don't think when DNA was invented or created, our names were not put on the strands of DNA. If they were, it would make our jobs a whole lot easier. So with what we know now of our suspect not being from the United States initially, that just made it all the more difficult to try and locate him.
And if we can, I don't know who's best, Andy or Chris, on the crime that happened in Los Angeles. Just a quick overview for the listeners of what was accused, or at least what they were investigating out there.
Yes, sir. So the family in Los Angeles had a birthday party that day, and the party went into the early morning hours. I think around 2:30, 3 o'clock was when they decided to all go to bed. Shortly after everybody went to sleep, our suspect entered through the living room window. He actually checked a rear window as well. He came in and encountered a female resident at the location. She was in her 30s, sleeping on the sofa, and he began to assault her. We don't know what his motive was, but during the process, he created some type of disturbance. A young juvenile female was alerted to that noise, came downstairs, and observed her mom laying on the floor. She was looking down at her mom. The family had a small dog whose attention was kind of drawn to under the dining room table. She happened to notice there was a male subject under the dining room table. There was a couple people that spent the night from the party, so this little girl didn't know if that individual was just somebody from the party that was staying the night, or if, who exactly that person was. So the individual came out from underneath the table, who we knew was Victor, and told the little girl that her mom hurt her head. And he handed the little girl a pack of frozen vegetables that he got out of the freezer. When she turned away from Victor, Victor began assaulting her. He took her over to the corner. During that assault, her older brother, who was 18 and was up in his bedroom playing video games, heard the noise and came downstairs and confronted the suspect. During that confrontation, the 18-year-old brother picked up a chair and kind of forced the suspect out of the residence. And I know a lot of people ask, how come the brother and people from the house weren't fighting with this individual? They were obviously alarmed that this guy was in the house assaulting the 9-year-old girl and the mother. So he was leaving the residence, and the 18-year-old just felt that since he's leaving the residence, we'll just let him leave, and then we'll call the police. So I don't think he exactly knew what was going on, because this was at 3 a.m. there. But the guy was leaving, so we'll just let him leave.
And also on the doorbell footage, on the Ring doorbell footage, that was another matter of consternation for a lot of people watching the doorbell, how calmly he's at the door. There's a young person's arm, I think it was the little girl's arm, right, who pulls the door closed, and then he turns and walks away with his shirt off. And it seems very calm. Right. And, and again, it led LAPD out there. They came out and they took the report. Thankfully, they collected some evidence. Let's stop at that. But the way he departed the residence and what we released on the film looked like he was calmly. But, just to assure the listeners that aspect was well investigated, that they did not know who he was. He was not somebody friendly that they were trying to cover for.
Yeah, I know we received several tips that indicated that he had to know the family, he had to be a friend or family member associated with people that lived there, but he was not. We looked into that. We actually went out to Los Angeles and interviewed the family. ourselves, and we, with the assistance of their child advocacy center out in Los Angeles, we had the 9-year-old forensically interviewed, and unfortunately, we were able to determine that they had no knowledge that who Victor was, but it didn't really further our investigation to finding him.
But what did further our investigation is what he left behind.
Yes, sir. He left a hat behind. It was a like an Air Jordan style baseball cap, and luckily for us, the two Los Angeles police officers that responded to the house collected it and submitted it for DNA.
I thought there was there something else, a water bottle? Or
there was a beer bottle that he picked up. I think when the brother picked up a chair, Victor picked up a beer bottle, but I don't believe we got any DNA from that. So.
Just the DNA came from the hat.
And then we found out later that actually he was actually staying a couple blocks away with another relative at that time?
Yes, sir. So on a follow-up trip out to L.A., we made contact with Victor's family, his brother, a cousin that he worked for, and where they were living at the time was about a block northwest, or so. But the house was identical. It was built by the same builder. And we even mentioned to one of his family members, well, maybe Victor was, confused. He hadn't lived here long.
It happens. People we see it happen all the time here where people get intoxicated and try to go into a house that's not theirs.
Right. And, trying to give him the out, I guess you could say. But his relatives said, no, he's a predator. So
then this was after the arrest. This is further down the trail. We didn't, unfortunately, and despite Los Angeles' efforts and several visits by you all, we didn't uncover that information until after the arrest in the case, as far as the relative, the brother living in the area. So I think it's interesting you touch on. So we collect the hat. They collect the hat. We get the hit. As Phil so eloquently posed, the name is not attached anywhere. He didn't shout out his name when he was leaving, so we didn't have a name, but we had the DNA hit. So in the months that followed, I guess if there's criticism, and I'll be the first to fess up, I was concerned that this would be a cold case and we would never catch it, because it's truly a random,
stranger on stranger
attack. Random, and the DNA didn't come back to a name. It came back to a hip. It didn't come back to a name. So I had my fear, something I'm happy to say our criminal investigators, if they had it, they kept it better hidden than me. Phil and I have had that discussion several times. They were confident that they were going to bring this killer to justice, and not to give away the end, but that's where we're heading. But in the months that followed, we got, I don't want to say heat, we got some criticism about why we didn't do a sketch. We had the video. Did Los Angeles have a sketch in there?
No, sir. The sketch artist actually originally worked in Baltimore City and then started doing work out in California. So
small world.
Yes, sir.
But then we ended up with a sketch, and that was right before we did the last podcast, so January, February. Can you talk a little bit, I'm going to turn to Phil again, about, as the lead investigator in the case and the most talkative one in the room, what got us to that point of finally having a sketch that we had high confidence in?
Sure. So initially, early on, we reached out to the public and asked anyone who may have been on the trail in and around the time that Rachel was on the trail if they saw anything suspicious, anything suspicious in the days, weeks, months leading up to her disappearance. We had a couple people come forward. One of those individuals, we asked if they would be able to provide or help to compile a sketch. They agreed. We got in touch with the sketch artist in California. Thankfully, with today's technology, they were able to communicate via Zoom conference and complete that sketch. That sketch was provided to us. Before we released that sketch, we wanted to show the witnesses from L.A. the sketch to see if they agreed that it was the same individual. Sergeant Maddox and Captain Lane and Sergeant Maddox flew to Chicago because the individual was in the Navy in boot camp.
The same young man who interrupted the assault in the house.
Right. So they flew out there, and come to find out he had been transferred to Pensacola, Florida. So they took a trip to Chicago for nothing. Sergeant Maddox and I flew to Pensacola and showed the witness, the 18-year-old brother, the sketch. He said it was close, but there was a couple things that he felt were a little off. So we got him in touch with the sketch artist. A second sketch was completed. And then what the sketch artist did is he took those two sketches and basically merged them into one sketch. And ultimately that was the sketch that was released. And then we asked him if he could put a picture of the hat onto the sketch in case someone recognized him from wearing a hat.
Right, yeah.
Yes, sir.
So I know you said initially there was a little bit of a delay getting the sketch out, and people were questioning that. We did try the 18-year-old earlier on. We did ask him if he was capable of sitting down with a sketch artist and doing a sketch. At that time, he didn't feel comfortable doing that. He didn't feel like he had enough of the description to do the sketch. The witness that came forward and was able to provide a sketch didn't come forward initially. It took her like 2 months, Phil?
Probably 3 months.
To come forward, and she didn't feel like her information was valuable. But it actually turned out to be Victor in the woods that day that she saw. And then based on that sketch that we had, we learned how much detail that our witness in L.A. actually did have. So that kind of explains a little bit the delay that we had there.
Hey, going back to the witnesses on the trail, there's something that during the trial, it was a little bit of a bone of contention, at least for the defense tried to make it through, that when people witnessed Victor on the trail or a person on the trail, that they had like a stick or we recovered a shovel. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So with today's technology, with cell phones and things like that, we were able to do essentially a search of the area to see if there were any devices that were in the area that we could identify that could lead us to a potential witness or something like that. We kept getting a hit in the middle of the woods off the trail. So a couple days after Rachel was found, a small group of our detectives went out and did another search of this area, and they located a shovel. It was apparent the shovel was new. It had been there for a little bit. There was at least 2 heavy rainstorms that came through the area. We collected it anyway. We swabbed it. We fingerprinted it. Of course, we got nothing because it was out in the elements. But one of our witnesses who saw, that Sergeant Maddox referred to prior, that passed Rachel just before she was attacked, described a individual that he saw off the side of the trail that carried a black walking stick that looked like a manufactured walking stick. The description that he gave basically matched the description of the shovel that our detectives found and ultimately collected. We can't say for sure that's what it was because there's no DNA or evidence of fingerprints or anything on it, but we're pretty sure that that's what our witness saw the suspect with.
Was that like a weapon that we think he used in an initial attack?
It's quite possible, yes, sir.
So again, and you touched on a little bit, I think between the technology, and I learned a lot in this case, not that I'll ever be able to employ it in my function, nor will I need to, but technology and science, the DNA, again, we had the hit, we're working with the state, and again, we've said it many times, but for those people listening, this is truly, and I've been doing this 40 years, this is a case that without the local, the state, the federal partners all working hand in hand cooperatively, this case doesn't get solved. So again, the feds helped us a lot, and the SAC came into the press conference at the time of the arrest and kind of spoke about the DNA collection and how they were working that end of it while we were working, I guess, back to the hit to Los Angeles and jumping around the country. You all left no stone unturned in the effort to Chris has said the name Victor several times. That's the murderer in this case. Left and letting Victor stay out there, and thankfully, from everything we know, did not offend again, at least did not take a life. So with that, a little bit about how we finally narrowed in through those two, technology and DNA, on Victor.
So when we didn't get a name with the DNA hit from CODIS, we started to research other options and how we could identify this individual. And through technology, fortunately, we were able to partner with some of our allied agencies, and we were able to determine that we had a name of Victor Antonio Martinez Hernandez. With that information, that led us to be able to identify some of his relatives. Those relatives lived in Prince George's County, not too far, but far enough when you're trying to drive it in rush hour. We went down there. We got his name on Rachel's birthday, which I believe was May 20th. In the weeks following that, we were able to identify some of his family in PG County. On June 13th, several of us went down to interview that family. Initially, they were a little reluctant to give us information. I think they thought that maybe they were going to be in trouble for having done something or not done something. Once we got over that hurdle, they were very open and forthcoming with evidence. They told us that they knew Victor, that he was family, that sometime in December of 2023, several months after Rachel was murdered, he reached out to his aunt and basically said, "Can you give me a place to stay? Can you help me out?" He showed up there. He stayed there until they figured April, May sometime of 2024. And he left. They hadn't seen him since, and we asked them if he left anything behind, toothbrush, comb, anything that we could possibly get his DNA off of. They very quickly told us that the couch that I had been sitting on, behind the couch were 2 bags of his clothing. He had shoes in a closet, so obviously we got their consent to take those items. With it being months since Victor had been there, we considered it abandoned property. Therefore, we took it. We got back to our office at, I think it was 8 or 9 o'clock that night. One of our evidence techs was there waiting on us. He photographed all the things, took some swabs. We had already reached out to the Maryland State Police Forensics Lab, and they told us to be there first thing in the morning at 8 o'clock.
Which is an unusual occurrence, correct? Because, I mean, there's a lot of DNA that gets submitted to the Maryland State Police from all different agencies across Maryland. And, I mean, I just want to give them a little shout-out of the prioritization they gave us on this case, because sometimes it could take months to a year to get some DNA tests back, and they prioritized this case for us.
They did. Not only did they prioritize it for us, but the people who work in that lab were available to us 24 hours a day. We called them when they were on vacation. They stopped what they were doing and came in and changed their hours and did everything they could to try to help us to get to the end of it.
All right, yeah, I just wanted to give them a little shout-out.
For sure. Much deserved.
So they asked us to be there Friday morning, June 14th at 8 o'clock. At 7:30, I was sitting in their parking lot waiting for them to open their doors. Turned the DNA swabs over to them, came back to the office, and we basically waited. And it was the longest day of my career, but it turned out to be the best day of my career, hands down. Roughly at 5 o'clock that evening, we got notified that the DNA recovered from the clothing the family identified as being Victor's, that it matched the DNA that was recovered from our crime scene off of Rachel.
Yeah, and that, again, and when did you say, was it the end of May, on Rachel's, beginning of May, Rachel's birthday, when
May 20th, I believe, was
when we
her
ID'd
birthday.
the name, and then we just needed the positive tie to the crime scene. And I can remember here, being in the office, Major Simpson, who's not here with us in the podcast room, but who had left a 3x5 on my card, on my desk with the name Victor Hernandez. And when I asked him later, I said, "Is this what I think it is?" And he said, "Yes." And it was a matter of you all putting the pieces together with that final DNA hit. I mean, it was one of the highlights of my entire 40 years for sure. Stepped up by when you finally did make that arrest, and we're going to talk about that a little bit here in just a couple of minutes. So from May, what was her birthday?
May 20th.
May 20th, and then the final DNA hit from State Police was
June 14th.
So basically just a little over a month. So I can I remember that day as well, coming to CID, we met with the family, let them know that because your next steps were obtaining the arrest warrant.
Correct.
Yeah, I told you.
Phil, one word. Correct.
one word.
That's what we did. We got an arrest warrant. Correct.
So a little bit, and you both were there. Megan, I don't believe you were there. I don't recall when we brought the family members in.
No, I wasn't there.
But I came up when we told her mom, and I know some other family members were notified separately, but that we had a suspect, but we didn't know where he was. So talk a little bit, one of you talk a little bit about that, what I thought was going to be the next long continuation.
Yeah, we thought it was going to be a nationwide manhunt, but...
Yes.
Yeah, so working with a couple of the relatives that we met down in PG County in Northern Virginia, we were able to learn that Victor created a new Facebook every time he would move around. He had several Facebook pages, and it appears he may have accidentally reached out to one of his family members on one of those Facebook pages when he created a new one after he left town. So Corporal Majeski, who works for our major case unit, he's really good with tracking people down with telephones and social media. He was able to obtain a telephone number that this Facebook page was basically using or associated with down in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So we got an exigent order through the phone company.
The family also gave us what they thought was his phone number, and that phone number that they provided us was the number that was listed on the new social media account. So we had a good idea that it was going to be
That was the right number. Yeah.
Yeah, so we were able to get an exigent ping for that phone, and I've never seen a radius this tight before, but it was 13 meters for the ping on the phone, and to the point where we were able to tell that he was walking down the street or moving slowly down the street. So Corporal Majeski and Tulsa PD were in contact, and we tracked the guy down to a bar down there in Tulsa.
So again, I mean, this is a case that's taken us from right here in our sleepy little Harford County community to Los Angeles to Chicago to Pensacola, Florida to Prince George's, Northern Virginia area. What am I missing? And now to the middle of the country, to Tulsa, Oklahoma, where he's at a bar.
Hey, real quick, just sort of, I think it's interesting that he didn't just leave PG County on a whim to go to. We don't know why he went to Tulsa, but he didn't just leave PG County on a whim. He kind of knew that we were on to him a little bit.
He was still in PG County when one of the federal partners who was working with us had gone to the residence in PG County where we believed the relatives of the person involved resided and left a business card there. When he saw that business card and his family asked him the obvious question is, why is federal law enforcement knocking on our door and looking for you? That's when he fled. Months later, that business card actually did come into play because when we served search warrants in Tulsa later on, we recovered that business card in his backpack.
Right.
So when he tried to tell us that he had never been to Maryland, he didn't know what Maryland was, that obviously wasn't true.
Don't say it wasn't true. He didn't tell the truth. And we've seen. I've seen the body camera footage of the arrest out there in Tulsa. I've actually visited the bar because, ironically enough, shortly after the arrest, and you guys can talk about that a little bit. National Sheriff's Association's annual conference was in Oklahoma City, a 45-minute drive up to Tulsa. So after the arrest, we took a trip up, visited the bar, and went by and saw the chief and the sheriff up there and thanked them for their assistance in capturing this guy for us. So a little bit, just whoever wants to, a little bit about how we have the information he's at this bar. How does the arrest go down?
Man, a few words again coming up.
So that night we were sitting there in our office, and it was incredible watching Corporal Majeski and Detective Ross weave their magic. I can honestly say I didn't do a whole lot that night except watch two skilled craftsmen do their craft. We had what we know now as Victor in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We followed him around for probably an hour to an hour and a half, and he always seemed to be one step ahead of us. We got him to a residence. Tulsa PD set up on the residence. They saw someone come out of this residence and get into a car. They tried to follow the car, and unfortunately, they lost it. So our next ping was about a 11-meter ping. So 3 feet in a meter. The phone was within 33 feet of a tower. Detective Ross brought up a street view map of the coordinates that we had, and it was the little shopping center where the bar was at. And in the back parking lot of this shopping center was a cell tower. So we knew that the chances were he was in that shopping center. So we got a hold of Tulsa, let them know what was going on. They pulled in, and lo and behold, the car that they saw show up at the house was sitting in the parking lot of this shopping center. And there was only one business open, and that was the bar. Ultimately, they went in. They found Victor sitting at the bar. I think they said something like, "You might want to enjoy that beer. It's going to be your last one." And at that point in time, he was taken into custody.
Now, he readily identified himself at that point in time, right?
Yes, he didn't.
He did. Yes, he did. He gave him a different name, I believe, was the story, right?
Yeah, the gentleman that was with him eventually identified him. And then a little bit later, Victor finally came off of it that he was who we thought he was.
And didn't he hand off his phone in the bar as well when he was...
Yeah, to one of his buddies that he was there with.
But we ended up getting...
I was going to say, we didn't let that hand off.
They weren't as close friends as Victor thought, I think.
and kudos to the officers from Tulsa PD who went out there and made that arrest, because they didn't allow themselves to be snowed or BS'd. Keep it clean because we're on air. But they watching the video, body camera footage from that, no nonsense, identified him, took their time, did it right, and identified him and put him in custody.
I just think it's impressive, and not to put a feather in our hat, but just when I was growing up, you always heard the long arm of the law, and I never really understood that till this case. We got his name, or we got the confirmation at 5 o'clock that night that he was who we thought committed our crime, and by 11:30 that night, Eastern Standard Time, he was in custody in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Yep. I can tell you, the major let us know that this could be a couple of weeks. They're working the phone. What information? We had the Facebook. We had the phone. We're working it. Could be a couple of weeks. We asked the family that we had a suspect. We had a warrant. Please don't share. We don't want this guy fleeing. Because an interesting, we're going to discuss it a little bit, but at this point we knew that Victor was not in the country legally. From the time we identified him, we knew he was illegally in the country. So we were, he came in illegally. He wants to get back out, or if he knew we were coming, he already was probably had strong indication that we were onto him by the visit by our federal partner, and that's why he left the Maryland area. But I forget where I was going with that, but just the fact that the great work that was done to bring him in, to put all the pieces together, that he came back here. I had a thought, and it quickly left my head.
Do you want somebody to kind of go through the avenues he took to be in the country and how he ended up getting here, and maybe why he left where he lived to come here?
Yeah, I do, but it's not where my mind was going.
I thought maybe that's where you were going. I think it's a good time to
throw that in there. I think it is, and somewhere along here it'll come back to me.
I think one of the things that surprised us and was definitely disturbing when we learned who Victor was, and we started researching how he came here and why he would be here, was that there was what's referred to as a red notice, which is essentially another country through Interpol letting law enforcement worldwide know that they're looking for somebody, that they committed a crime, that there's a warrant for their arrest in another country. And we learned that Victor was wanted in El Salvador for the homicide of a woman that occurred in December of 22. Actually, it was New Year's Eve of 22 going into 23. So we knew that not only was he our suspect here in Harford County, but that he had committed a violent crime in El Salvador, and that's why he fled. Then he committed another violent crime in California. So it definitely motivated us to try to find him as fast as we could.
So from the time of the homicide in El Salvador of the female, 8 months later, he's been to Los Angeles and now in Maryland and takes Rachel's life.
He has, and it was one of the things we did when we went through the case. We were highlighting different places and trying to create a timeline, and it really was amazing to see the distance that one person had traveled and the amount of just destruction they'd caused in that time frame between the murder in El Salvador, the really violent and vicious assault he committed in Los Angeles, and then the murder here.
Yeah, but going back to that, I think I agree with you. It's crazy to think about the distance that he traveled to get here. But then even after he committed the murder, he didn't run away right away.
The murder here in Harford County.
Yeah.
No, he didn't. The assumption that I think a lot of people had was that when he committed this crime, he fled immediately after. That, it had been brought to our attention, well, maybe he committed the crime because he knew he was going to leave, that he lives a transient lifestyle, and that was one of the things that was going to make it difficult to find him. And that was certainly possible. We didn't know. But we came to find out later that he didn't arrive in PG County until December. So he was in Bel Air, in Harford County, in this area, in the immediate area.
Working at local businesses?
Working at local businesses for months after the offense.
And again, hindsight's 20/20, but seeing what he did in what he stands accused of doing in El Salvador, what we know he did here in Harford County, I think the outcome, had he not been interrupted in Los Angeles, probably would have been much more severe, if not fatal, for that female victim.
I think you're right here. The brother hearing that disturbance and coming downstairs probably prevented somebody from losing their life that night.
Yes, I agree. I think the young juvenile who was there was nearly killed, and absolutely, if her brother hadn't come downstairs, that would have had a terrible outcome.
So we're going to move into, I guess, still in my brain of where I was in Tulsa, but I was talking about the major letting us know it was going to take some time to. Not to feel like this could happen too soon, that it could take weeks if he doesn't flee. But that night I got the call that he was in custody. Again, so many moments during this case and during this arrest is just another high of knowing that this murderer has been picked up and off the road. But it was how many hours, you say, Phil?
We got the confirmation it was him at 5 o'clock that evening. We got the arrest warrant sometime 6:30. And he was in custody by 11:30 Eastern Standard Time.
Yeah. So, and I'm trying to remember, we did the press conference the very next day, I think, here announcing the arrest, and any listeners who are following it, who have followed this case, and there's a whole bunch who have followed it very closely, can watch that press conference online. And I did address the fact that he was in the country illegally, and we had our state, local, federal partners standing side by side with us. But during that press conference, or at least after the press conference, let's talk a little bit about our murder suspect, our murderer, because we know what happens in court, coming back, his trip back here to Maryland.
So I was told I was going to be at the press conference that next day. Fortunately for me, I was on a plane to Tulsa when that press conference took place. So we got down there, and like so many other places we've gone, not just this case, but doing our jobs in general, Tulsa PD opened their facilities to us and couldn't have been more accommodating. We were able to conduct an interview with Victor. That lasted, I think, 2 to 3 hours. We got what we thought we were going to get, which was he didn't know anything about anything, had never been to Maryland, didn't know where Maryland was, denied having been to California, knowing anybody in California. Eventually, we were able to prove all of that wrong. We were able to execute several search and seizure warrants while we were down there. One, basically at the house that he was staying at, and like Captain Lane alluded to earlier, we found several things in the room that he was staying at in that house. And again, one of them was the business card from our federal partners, bus tickets that kind of showed us how he was getting from point A to point B. And we eventually came back here. 2 days later, we flew back to Tulsa, escorted Victor back here to Harford County, where we got a known standard of his DNA, sent that to the lab just for confirmation purposes, and obviously that came back positive. We executed a search and seizure warrant on his phone, and there were several pictures of Rachel on his phone from press releases and things like that. And during the interview, he denied ever knowing her name or having known her or seen her or anything like that. And the one thing that kind of stuck out to me was the night of June 14th, the night he was arrested, there was a short clip of a news reporter standing in front of the Harford County Sheriff's Office headquarters building doing an update on the case at 11 o'clock that night. And by 11:30, he was taken into custody.
Poetic justice.
Is that what you wanted to jump into?
Yeah, I know Megan saw quite a few of his searches in the phone that we got from him in Tulsa.
Yeah, I ended up not actually downloading this phone. I had started with it, and I had tried to get into it about six or so times, but my software just wasn't caught up to speed with that particular phone yet. My supervisor, Heather Marsh, ended up downloading this, but I remember looking through the download, and I found that screenshot of the news broadcast, like right before he was arrested. I was like, did anyone happen to see this? Like, this is a screenshot. Like, this one he made.
But never been to Maryland before.
Yeah.
But just some newscast from this faraway place. So, and then you said what a great help Tulsa was when you were out there doing the interview and then going back out and making the arrest. And it was, was it the Bureau or was it the Homeland Security? Who flew us back and forth?
Homeland Security donated their plane for us to fly Victor back from Tulsa.
And I've told Phil there's a news photograph of him. Is it Chris? You?
I'm out of frame, sir.
Okay, yeah. It's centered on the suspect, and this is the most we've said his name because one of the things the Colonel and I have subscribed to since early on, a class we went to, was no notoriety. That when someone does something that's horrific, they don't deserve to have their name ever pronounced. But we want to make sure the listeners understand who we're talking about as we tell the stories. But that photograph that was taken, I guess by the Sun, one of the local newspapers, that's a photograph of a career. I expect if I'm at your retirement thing, that'll be there somewhere.
I hope it's my career case.
Yes, I hope it is too.
Right,
for sure. Yes, unless you're working some other country.
I know I heard something about something he might have said on the plane ride back about Mexico or something to that effect.
So we had Sergeant Chris Crespo from the detention center that went with us just to help with any translation, if he had made any comments. And he did have an odd question. He asked if the FBI investigates crimes in Mexico. So we were never able to determine what that meant. We know a couple times when the suspect would try to cross the border, because of COVID, they weren't sending the immigrants back to their home country. They were just pushing them back into Mexico. We know he was pushed back into Mexico several times before he came over finally. But there could be a crime in Mexico that we're just not aware
link
of.
To it.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. It is an odd question.
Yeah, it's a scary question because the thought of the violence that was inflicted on Rachel and what he started in Los Angeles and what he did in El Salvador. Could be another victim out there. We've been pleased, if that's the right word, that we haven't stumbled across anything else here in the country. Chris talked about it a little bit. He was turned away twice at the border. That immigration angle became a big part of this whole story on 3 different occasions. Phil's letting me know he was turned away, but then ultimately just walked across an unsecured southern border, and it's something that I've been vocally opposed to way before this case even happened. And
Really?
Yes. Sitting on the National Sheriff's Border Committee and talking about the need for our southern border to be much more secure, completely secure, but as secure as you can make something in this life. The frustration of having been an advocate for that and then having this individual end up in this community of all communities and take Rachel's life in such a horrific, there's no good way to have your life taken, but there's extra horrific ways, and this was up there.
Yeah, when we met back with the family, they told us, he downloaded the app on his phone and requested asylum, was given a court date, and he joked that, he's never going to go to that court date. And then, here we are.
Right. And most people who come into the country illegally, at least previously, were doing just that. I think it was a 90-some% not show up rate for the court date. So we know he didn't care about the immigration laws because he didn't care about the criminal laws.
About any laws, right?
It's sad that Rachel, and of course we have the Kayla Hamilton case here in our county as well from the year before, which was at the hands of another suspect from El Salvador who's been convicted in her death. But to have two women's lives taken in just our little county, that's something that happens across the country, sadly, all too often. So that isn't meant to be, we didn't want to make immigration. We've had its own podcast. I think we did one on that as well. But moving forward, so we have him back here. He gets to spend his time at our detention center awaiting trial. So what, I know, Megan, I heard so many compliments about your testimony. The trial was 2 weeks, basically 2 weeks long. What Phil, you testify. Chris, I guess you had.
No, they didn't need me, so I just watched.
Okay, so
did a good job watching too.
Before we get to the trials of the jury, the deliberation, what can you tell us about the case itself? And kudos to our state's attorney, Allison Healy, for and her team for the prosecution. But what do you want to offer on the court proceedings against Victor?
I think, to back up just a little bit, once Victor was in custody and we had him back here in Harford County, the investigation didn't end there. We continued to try and identify people that he may have been staying with here in the county, to interview them, to have them tell us that they recognized him, they knew him, that he was here during the time frame. We also went back out to California to interview the family now that we kind of knew who they were and where they were at. And one of the things that kind of struck us is we located a younger brother of Victor, and when we went to interview him, we all kind of stopped for a minute and looked, because he was wearing the same exact hat that Victor had left in the house in L.A. when he committed the burglary and assault. It was the Air Jordan hat.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, same color and everything. And his brother said that they had bought the hats together.
Is that right? Wow. How scary is that? I did not know that aspect of the story. So you're talking to witnesses, and I'm seeing a picture of it now. With the hat, going back to the hat and the hat that was recovered out there, the cardboard that comes in when you buy a new hat, that was still in the hat, right? It was his style of wearing it with that cardboard in the hat?
We believe so. Detective Wazinski, one of our forensics people, he
wears his hat that way.
Well, he may. I don't know. He doesn't at work, I can assure you of that. But he located some cardboard inside the tunnel when we were processing the scene, and we believe that it came from inside of a hat. The cardboard that helps keep it its shape and form. But we could never prove that.
And I'm trying to remember, was there cardboard in the hat in Los Angeles?
Yeah, on the body camera, you could see we froze the body camera. You can still see it in the hat.
Okay. Moving on. And you say, remember, he said he was never in Maryland, but now we're finding people. We know where he lived, and unfortunately, we know that he used that hiking trail from one of the places that he was staying down into the town quite routinely, and that's probably most likely. Do we know for certain how he got an eye for Rachel, or was it just happenstance of that day?
I think it's a general consensus among those of us in CID that Victor was on the trail quite a bit because he didn't have anything else to do. And with Rachel being on the trail on a daily basis, pretty much the same time each day, he sort of got to pattern her and know where she would be, when she would be. And we think that he just waited until he had the opportunity and took advantage of it, and unfortunately, it cost her life.
Yeah, because that trail, he could have got lucky and it been the first day that he tried to do it, but a lot of people from this community use that trail, and to find an opportunity where she would be in that spot where he was and nobody else around to commit the crime is not coincidental.
The direction that one of our witnesses that we had, who last one to see Rachel before the attack, did see who we now know to be believed to be Victor coming down from it's a hill right behind that, but that hill would give him an elevated position to where he can see directly down from where Rachel would have been coming, and she would have turned a corner, so it gave him the opportunity to see her coming and then work his way down. She wouldn't have been able to see him from the angle that she was running.
Right.
So we don't, honestly, I mean, at the end of the day, we don't know whether he was out there a week, 6 months, well, we have somewhat of a timeline, but we don't know when he crossed paths, or as the Colonel said, it could have just been that day that he was out there and she was the lone woman without anyone else within sight or what he thought sound, and took advantage of it. But it's more likely, based on experience, that he somewhere crossed paths with her, developed an infatuation, and decided to take advantage. And that never really came to light one way or the other during the trial. He didn't testify, right?
Correct. He did not.
He did not testify. He didn't want to tell the jury that he was never in Maryland.
These guys can speak to it a lot more than I can. But I did watch some of the trial, and, of course, I focused on the witnesses, but also paying attention to him. He's a cold-blooded killer. He had zero remorse. He would smirk at some of the descriptions of the crime. Just in this time that I was watching, this guy's a complete psychopath.
And he did not speak English, right? He does not speak English.
I'm sure he understands some, but he claimed not to speak any English at all.
So when you say he was smirking, was the entire thing translated for him?
Yeah, they had a translator that was translating everything that was being said.
Didn't he wave to you, Phil, or smile at you, or give you a thumbs up or something?
We had a short recess, and when I looked over, he nodded, and I nodded back just to be cordial. As far as the trial goes, I can't testify here much of what happened because I was sequestered, so I couldn't be in there.
Right.
Megan, I do know, I heard so much praise about, we all have praise for how you process the scene, and again, the technology stuff's over my head, but then your testimony, how, I want to say damaging to him, or how much that aided in the verdict.
Thank you. I've gotten so much positive feedback from my testimony, which I'm not used to, but I'm very appreciative
You don't
of
get
it. So
positive
thank
feedback
you.
of a CID?
Well,
I'm
I
looking at the
do,
captain.
but no one ever comes to watch me testify, and this one, was very popular, right. So it was a packed house, and so that was very different, but I'm appreciative of it. Thank you.
No, it's much deserved, because it's, as Phil said, hopefully the case of all of our lifetimes.
Yes.
So, again, kudos, and we're going to talk a little bit about kudos before we wrap up.
Throw a shameless plug out there, since I don't know when this one will exactly air, but we have probably one of the best forensics units in the country, and we are hiring for one right now. We are looking for another person.
I think we have one on the list, but hopefully that person works out.
We're still in the process.
We're
still in the process.
HartfordSheriff.org openings. And we're hiring for law
corrections
enforcement.
and corrections.
Law enforcement's getting posted
soon,
but that might be after this. The podcast might already be out after.
We have a wait list. Just go in there and jump on there.
So,
can I say real quick?
Yes.
For when I testified, because I was a witness for the state and the defense, which was very different for me. So when I testified for the state, I was up there for about an hour and a half or 2 hours, and then I was the defense's only witness, which is quite a weird spot to be in. But I think I was only up there about 10 minutes.
And what did they want you to testify to?
Well, after they reiterated that I was an expert and all the good stuff that I did, they had maybe 5 questions about Rachel's internet history and some searches that she had made.
Trying to bash the victim a little bit.
Yeah.
Victim blame.
It was interesting.
Well, and again, kudos. Our state's attorney herself, Allison Healy, prosecuted the case. And remind me, it was like, what was it, 1 week or 2 weeks of deliberation for the jury to come back?
45 days.
How much time was it? 46 minutes, that's right. Yes, I do think that's what you call a slam dunk, when the jury doesn't even want dinner or lunch or whatever mealtime was coming up. We all know just how guilty he is, and you heard the Colonel say lack of any kind of lack of remorse demonstrated. His at this time of this recording this podcast, we're still waiting for sentencing, which is scheduled for later next month. Early next month?
August 11th. Sorry.
August 11th. Hopefully, and I've said, he was anxious to come to this country illegally. I've said many times, it's now not time for him to go back. I hope people answer. He has that red notice. He would stand trial in his home country of El Salvador if he were to go back. I want to see him. We had no death penalty in Maryland. Personally, me, Jeff Gahler, Sheriff Gahler, I want to see him die in a Maryland prison at a ripe old age. I don't want anything adverse to happen to him, but I want to see him never have the freedom to move amongst civilized human beings again, because he's proven he's just a monster. Before I go into some other things, I want to talk about some of the accolades that have been received or are coming. And is there anything else on the case that anybody wants to?
Any other interesting things you can think of that people might be interested in? We got a lot of head nodding going back and forth. I said, no.
The only other thing I could add is there was a local business that sends money transfers to different countries. And we were able to show, once we identified who Victor had a small daughter in El Salvador, and once we identified who the mother was, we were able to find receipts where he had people sending money wires to El Salvador to the baby's mother. So just something else that helped put him here in Harford County.
Okay, good.
Yeah, and I'm kind of looking at a little outline that was prepared before we got started. I do want to ask this question before we start to begin closing out, but of the many, I don't know, hundreds, thousand tips that we received, of all the tips that we received, what was the most, crazy? The Sasquatch came out of the woods. Is there
Mountain lion?
Mountain lion.
Yeah.
What is it?
There was a mountain lion.
Mountain lion.
Yes, someone emailed us to say that they thought the injuries maybe were consistent with her being attacked by a mountain lion, and that we hadn't considered that yet.
Or she internally combusted. Was that one of them, too?
No, so there's two.
That's putting it politely, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I know, and I think it was Phil that said it earlier that all the tips, and maybe it was Andy, all the tips that came in, our men and women from CID, assisted by patrol, assisted by our partners when they were outside the county, followed up on everything. So mountain lion, although, yes, laughable, God forbid we ever have this serious of a case again. Yeah, serious. And that's a homicide. We're going to have homicide cases, unfortunately. But this sort of whodunit, again, most of the times you have a homicide case, the two people involved or the people involved, there's some association that's quickly identified. That just wasn't the case here, and kudos to what y'all do. Did you have something before?
Just reference to tips. Yeah, we did have some, like Phil said, thousands of tips that came in. Most of them, obviously all of them pretty much, didn't really lead to anywhere. The one that really did was the person who didn't think they really had anything to offer, and then it ended up they really did have something pretty valuable to offer. If there's a crime in your area, a murder, no matter what, a rape, and you think you might have something, make that call. And if we'll investigate it, or whatever other agency you'll investigate. If it turns out to be nothing, it's nothing. But who knows? It could be that one key piece of evidence that leads to the identification of a suspect. So make that call.
And with that, I do want to say that, when May 1st, I think it was May 1st, we had our agency awards ceremony. As the sheriff, I'm proud of the work the men and women of this office do every single day. But in my 40 years, this case stands alone in the magnitude. So I think we had about 30 people from CID, some of our allied partners, some of our allied agencies on stage that we recognized and gave an award to that night. But at the national level, the National Sheriff's Association doesn't allow us to nominate 30 people. We had to pick one. We nominated the lead investigator, Senior Deputy Phil Golden, for that recognition, which he won. And we're just back in the last few weeks from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, from the National Sheriff's Association's annual conference, where you were awarded the Bud Meeks Sheriff's Deputy of the Year for Merit, I think is. Am I getting the title right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And he spoke about as much down there, too, as he
used two words on that one. Yes, sir, not just yes.
And very humble, and Phil accepted it graciously and pointing out humbly. He wouldn't even walk back out after it came off stage, walk back out to the table.
The encore, he didn't get it.
No, he didn't want a standing ovation. Totally deserves one, as do all the men and women who touched this case. Phil's also nominated for the International Association Chiefs of Police Award, which we'll find out later this year whether we had any luck there. But it's not about the awards. It's about the successful conclusion of the case. And Megan, I know you were nominated and receiving an award coming up in Tennessee, right?
Louisville, Kentucky.
Yep. For something, what's the name of the organization? Homicide?
International Homicide Association.
Yes.
Were you, Chris, did you do the nomination?
Yes, sir.
Okay. because I wasn't in that chain, as I'm sure. I didn't know about it ahead of time, but I am still very pleased that someone took the time to recognize someone, and that person deservedly is getting that award, particularly at a national level, because this was a national and international case. So.
And correct me if I'm wrong, that not only are you getting the award there, Megan, but also now you've been tapped to go out and give some instruction at the homicide convention as well.
Oh, I haven't heard that part. Yes.
Maybe I heard it wrong, but
right.
Maybe.
Okay, maybe. Well, I'm sure you could help people improve themselves.
I would be happy to share.
Yes, we all want to work together, as this case has demonstrated so clearly. So with that, any closing thoughts around the room? I'm going to give a plug out to follow us on our podcast, Into the Sheriff Spotlight. I got it right, Into the Sheriff Spotlight. We've been at this a couple years, but if you haven't, you can go back on our webpage, hartfordsheriff.org, and listen to we don't have cameras in here yet, listen to past episodes, including the episode that came out in February 24, in reference to this case before it was concluded. Any closing thoughts?
Given the opportunity, I always thank our families because they go through just as much as we do in cases like this. So shout out to them. Thank you.
100%, yes. Anybody else? I'm seeing some head nods. So I'll thank you for listening and following. And
great job again.
Great job again. And we'll be having some new topics for you coming up in the future. Hopefully something a little more mundane would be preferable. And again, it was said here, a case of a career, and hopefully never repeated. Okay, well, we're going to close out this special episode, this special overview of the entire Rachel Morin case. As we talked about in the last segment, we still had sentencing. We are now past that. Sentencing was just this week. And I'm very pleased to say that our state's attorney presented the case. We heard some very touching victim impact statements.
Yeah, the victim impact statements were, I think the judge was going to give that sentence anyway, but they certainly seemed to have an impact on her, especially the ones with Rachel's children. Their recorded videos. The recorded sound of them talking about their mom was very impactful.
And before we get to the sentence, I will say we sat in court the entire day, pretty much. Me, the colonel, several members, a lot of the investigators who worked the case, both from our state and federal partners. We sat with the special agent in charge of the Baltimore office, Bill DeBagno, and the
Evan Campanella, the SAC from the Homeland Security.
Yeah, we sat.
Both were great partners all throughout this case.
Right. So we sat there and we listened to all the impact statements and looking at the monster sit there as he barely showed any reaction at all. I think at one time, I don't know whether it was acting or legitimate, he seemed to have a little bit of an emotional response. But through the 10 victim impact statements, as stoic as could be.
Yeah, and we had heard that possibly he had written or had a statement that he was going to read or do, but he did not do that. It was just he thanked the judge and his lawyers, and that was pretty much all he had to say about it. Didn't seem to me anyway, it didn't look like he had any remorse for what he did. And my understanding is throughout his psychological review that he was laughing and joking with the doctor, and all he cared about was how hard things were for him.
Well, that was mentioned several times by the state's attorney, Allison Healy. That was mentioned several times in her comments that was his reaction during that review. And I think the judge mentioned it as well in the sentencing. So the sentence was, although there were some motions, I guess, I don't know if they're motions or requests by the defense.
Yeah, the defense tried to say that the kidnapping and the sexual assault shouldn't be given sentences individually for those. They should be combined in with the murder and the rape. And the judge, to her credit, rejected both of those arguments.
Yeah. So a life sentence without the possibility of parole. As we talked about, there is no death penalty in Maryland anymore, which I firmly believe would have been the appropriate sentence for this.
Absolutely.
For the heinous act for what was done to Rachel and what's been done to her family as a result. Life without the possibility of parole, followed by a second life sentence and followed by 40 years, all to run consecutive, not concurrent. So that means, and the judge mentioned it, for all intents and purposes, this 20-some-year-old, 24 or 25.
He's 24 now. He's getting ready. I think they said in September. He's going to turn 25.
He will die in a Maryland prison with that jail sentence. Anytime, it concerns me, anytime Maryland's legislature has a chance to look out for the criminals, something will pass down the line years from now that will change that, and there's always the right to appeal. And I think he did say he wanted to appeal through his lawyers.
Yeah, his defense team had made a mistake in post-sentencing advisor rights to him. They told him he had 10 days to appeal, and then the judge swiftly corrected them and said, no, his 10 days to appeal was from the time the jury found him guilty, and those 10 days were a long time ago. So he can't appeal the sentence. I mean, he can't appeal the outcome, the conviction, but he can appeal, ask for a 3-panel judge hearing to try to challenge the sentencing.
Right. And part of that would be them talking to the sentencing judge. So I don't believe there's any pathway forward there. So hopefully, again, this individual wanted to come into this country illegally, wanted to target women, commit the most heinous of acts you can believe, including the brutal murder of Rachel. So at one point in this whole thing, he expressed an interest just to go back to El Salvador. That ain't happening. He's going to hopefully die an old man in a Maryland prison with a lot of time to think about what he did. And I come to mind here, we talked about sitting with the 2 special agents in charge and the others, media in the courtroom, but there were also a lot of the family who gave the impact statements.
Yes.
So brothers and sisters, the children did impact statements through video
or had
pre-recorded.
State's Attorney Allison Healy read one or two of them as well.
Again, to sit with the family. Although I didn't sit through the entire trial, I think some of the images they saw there and stories they heard there were just beyond what a family should ever be exposed to. There was a little bit of that in the sentencing. No one wants to see their loved one treated the way that Rachel was treated at the end of her life. So kudos to a strong and brave family. They came out and did talk to the press a little bit at the end. But that'll conclude this special episode podcast. And again, a just sentence, considering this is Maryland.
Right. As just as it can get in Maryland.
As justice will be in Maryland. So with that, we look forward to you speaking to you in our next podcast.
All right.